Hey, what's up guys? My name's Sanguine, and today I want to talk about one of my most anticipated games of all time, The Last of Us Part 2. I wanted to make this video to share with you guys what all I'd like to see from this game. Now, before I start, I wanted to clear one thing up. I realize that there's this big debate of whether this game should even be made, considering how much of a masterpiece The Last of Us was, along with the fact that Bruce Straley, the co-creator of The Last of Us, is no longer at Naughty Dog, and Neil Druckmann, though he would co-write the game, has stepped into the role of vice president of Naughty Dog. What goes hand in hand with these is the concept of overhyping the game. People think that, since the first one was so good, there is no way that the sequel could ever live up to the hype. Therefore, widespread disappointment is inevitable. So, for this video, I just want all of you to forget about all that. The focus of this video is what would make the game the best that it can be, and the kind of questionable existence of the game has nothing to do with that. So, without further ado, this is going to be my Last of Us Part 2 wishlist. The first thing on my list is new enemy types. Now, I don't know how exactly they could pull this one off for human enemies, but for the infected, it could get very interesting. They already introduced the three main types of infected, the runner, the clicker, and the bloater, and the concept of how the fungus transforms the host with time in The Last of Us. Since Part 2 takes place 5 years after the first one, it's very likely that a newer, more mutated form of infected has emerged, and I certainly hope this is the case. This idea of having the cordyceps fungus evolve and grow over time leaves lots of room for developer creativity in The Last of Us Part 2. The one thing I am wary of, though, is the possibility that the infected might become too outlandish, and what I mean by this is that I want The Last of Us to remain firmly grounded in the real world. I don't want infected animals running around, or infected runners crawling on the ceilings. Stuff like that would completely break the realism, and that's one of the best things about The Last of Us, it feels so real. Alright, up next is the return of multiplayer. If you didn't play the Factions multiplayer in The Last of Us, all I can say is that you missed out. The Last of Us has one of the most underrated multiplayer modes in all of gaming. If you own a copy of The Last of Us Remastered, I definitely recommend checking it out. A considerable amount of people still play it today, so it's not hard to find a match at all. I even jump back into it every once in a while. The only downside to it was that it was kind of microtransaction-y, but as long as they stick the cosmetics with it in Part 2, I'm completely okay with it. As for what I can say about the actual gameplay of the multiplayer mode, it had a great pace, well-designed environments, and a refreshing emphasis on teamwork, all of which I hope to see return in Part 2. One new thing I would like to see in Part 2's multiplayer is the addition of the infected. I always thought that that would be a very interesting mechanic that could really spice up the gameplay in multiplayer. It could be set up to where at a random point in the match, infected would be released into the map, and the players of both teams would have to deal with them, which, if they use guns, would give away their position. It could also present an opportunity for a team to ambush another team while they were busy fighting the infected. They could do it as its own mode or even make it a time thing, like a weekend event or something. I honestly can't say though that I'd be too disappointed even if the multiplayer in Part 2 were a carbon copy of the Factions multiplayer from Part 1, because it was so well done. Okay, the next thing that I hope Naughty Dog does in The Last of Us Part 2 is stick to one time period in the main story. What I mean by this is I hope that there's not a whole lot of jumping around in the timeline in the story. Ever since the Paris Games Week 2017 trailer, there have been lots of rumors that the mystery woman is actually Ellie's mother, and that the game will jump back and forth between a past storyline centered around Ellie's mom and a present-day storyline centered around Ellie. I really hope that this is not the case. While I'm all for learning about Ellie's parents and the story behind them, I think that a brief flashback cutscene or even plain dialogue would do the job just fine. I think that when you start jumping around from past to present, you not only offset the pacing of the game, but you create this almost two-in-one story structure, and it almost never works. By jumping between two times, you're jumping between two stories with different characters, different challenges, and funnily enough, different stories. This dynamic never really finds the right balance, and it just feels kind of awkward. For example, you could be in a really exciting part of the game and really invested in it, but all of a sudden, you're sucked over to the other time period. This sort of thing creates a pacing problem, and it's a problem that is easily avoidable. Though it's become increasingly likely that they will, I'd really prefer that they not take this approach with the game, as I believe it would dilute the overall narrative experience. With that being said, if anybody can prove me wrong, it's Naughty Dog. Admittedly, a huge part of the reason that I feel they need to stick with the modern day time period is the characters. The Last of Us is a story about Joel and Ellie, and to focus on anything but them would be, in my opinion, a mistake. Okay, up next is location variety. One thing that made The Last of Us so memorable for me was the diverse location of lineups that you visit in the main story. The story's prologue takes place in Austin. After the time jump, you're in Boston. From there, you go to small town Lincoln, to Pittsburgh, to Jackson, to Colorado, to Salt Lake City, and then back to Jackson. All of these locations are aesthetically and geographically distinct, and visiting them was one of my favorite parts of The Last of Us. Moments like looking out and seeing the ruined skyline of Boston or stomping around the snowy forests of the American West were some of my favorite moments from the entire game. Now, I know it's been confirmed that Part 2 takes place largely in Seattle, and that's okay, but I can only hope that there's a little bit more traveling to be done than Naughty Dog is letting on. Alright guys, my last hope for the game concerns the character of Joel, and that hope is that Joel is alive, well, and prominent in the main story. Ever since the reveal trailer was dropped at PSX 2016, people have been speculating that Joel is dead or is going to die. My message to Naughty Dog is, please, 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 please don't kill Joel. I don't know about everyone else, but at the end of The Last of Us, I care deeply for Joel. The last thing I want to see in this game is Joel die. Now, I know that people have said that, based off the reveal trailer, it looks like Joel will die early on and accompany the player throughout the game as a figment of Ellie's imagination. I think even this is a mistake. Furthermore, it's worth noting that he hasn't even appeared in any of the trailers or demos for the game since the reveal trailer. I can't tell you how much I hope I'm wrong, but, based off the marketing for the game so far, it doesn't look like Joel will play a prominent role in the story even if he is alive. It looks like The Last of Us Part 2 is shaping up to be an Ellie-centric story. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The Last of Us is a story of Joel and Ellie, and placing Joel on the back burner in the sequel would only be doing the character, the fans, and even the game a disservice. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up my wish list. I hope you all can tell that I'm a really big fan of The Last of Us and that I'm super hyped for Part 2. I think The Last of Us is definitely one of my favorite games of all time. That being said, I am trying to temper my expectations for Part 2. The last thing I want to do is overhype this game. But it's so hard when you're so deeply invested in a franchise like this. Anyway, yeah, I'm really excited to see what Naughty Dog brings to the table this time around, and I'm curious to see if Bruce Straley's departure or Neil Druckmann's promotion will have any effect on things. I'm also curious about when it's going to release. I mean, we've known about this game for over 2 years now, and normally we'd be able to kind of predict when it's coming based on past releases, but the development of The Lost Legacy has thrown everything out of whack. If I'm betting money, I'd say it drops in either Q1 or Q2 2020, but yeah, that's just a guess. I think that it could definitely be a finished product by the end of this year, but I doubt that Sony would try to push a big exclusive like that out in Q3 or the crowded holiday season of Q4. They never do that. But yeah, I hope we get some news or a new trailer soon. Even though Sony's not attending E3, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that we hear or see something fairly soon, because hey, God of War's release date was posted on the PlayStation blog, so yeah. Alright guys, that's going to be it for me today. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Leave a like and or comment if you enjoyed, and I will catch y'all in the next video.